Welcome to Education Scholars Conversations. I'm your host, Jeff Yan. In this episode, you will hear part 2 of my conversation with Clea Ramos, a student studying computer engineering and studio arts at Bucknell University. More links and information about today's conversation can be found on Education's Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Full episodes of Education Scholars Conversations can be found on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. So, let me ask you then, what are your current view as a soon-to-graduate student, especially Gen AI, became available to us 2 and a bit years ago, but really became pretty dominant probably in the last, let's call it year and a half, something like that. How has that been like for you as a student?
I remember when ChatGPT came out, I believe the winter of my sophomore year, and students were using it for everything at the time. And it was still pretty new, so I would just hear about it here and there. And because it's liberal arts, I have friends in engineering, I have friends in humanities, and I know the humanities have been pretty strict on it because their assignments comprise of mostly writings and readings, and they don't want you to ask ChatGPT to summarize it or to write you a paragraph that you're supposed to write yourself because you're not learning at that point. So I've taken a few classes in humanities, and some professors are very strict about it in that sense. But in the tech world, in comp sci, it's a really great tool for debugging. So you can put your code in it and say, I have an error here. Can you please help me fix it? And it won't do it 100% of the time completely correct. So sometimes you have to edit your query and be more specific. But I remember I was very hesitant to use it because it felt like cheating and it was kind of a morality issue. And I've seen students who just use ChatGPT to finish their whole coding assignment for them, which is against the point of doing the coding assignment yourself. So a lot of professors in STEM and in coding, specifically comp sci, are for the use of it, sometimes as long as you cite it or as long as you know the implications of it and use it as a tool rather than using it to do your work for you. So in that sense, I think it is a very efficient tool because it can save you hours of debugging, or if you know how to do something really quick, you can ask ChatGPT or any AI to generate it for you. And I think some people are afraid that it will take over our jobs, but it doesn't have that human aspect to it. Like we were saying earlier, it doesn't recognize the value that you're creating. So knowing that is really important to consider. So I would say I am for using ChatGPT as long as you're using it responsibly and as a tool. And it's a very powerful tool to accomplish things efficiently. But just to be sure, you can't rely on it.
I by the way, I'm also very much for using it irresponsibly, and I also think a lot about for the convenience that it affords you, and how else does it change the way we think about this world. So I think about in your case, for example, I can already hear from certain engineers that says, no, but Claire, you're wrong. It's the suffering of spending hours looking for that really, really little tiny bug that force you to learn.
I used to be like that.
You did, yeah. And
Yeah.
what changed, or what? Well, are you still think that way?
Well, because I felt like, again, like it was cheating, like I didn't learn from
Oh,
it.
right. Right.
But
Mhm.
but now if you don't use it, sometimes you're behind because other people will use it and generate it so much more quickly than you can learn it. And because sometimes with a search engine, you type in your question and you have to click on links, and sometimes it's not exactly what you're looking for. Whereas using AI, you type in your question and it will provide more resources and exactly what you want, depending on how clear you are in your comment. So it's that aspect of being efficient. Allows you to kind of get ahead and do things much faster.
And let me just keep asking that, right? So if you got done something faster, what does that do? Does it give you more time to what do you do with the time, like the hours of agony that it saved you, right? But
Yes.
what is that so what now? You've
Mhm.
just saved 4 hours of looking for this really tiny bug that it just turns out to be you missed a semicolon somewhere. Happens, right?
Yes,
Um,
the
and
semicolons.
so 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 now it saved you that time. What do you
Hmm.
do with that time because of that?
Yes, so I think that it does save time, but I make sure that I go back and read it to make sure I understand how the code is being produced and what it actually means, not just copy paste. Because then at that point, I'm not learning anything. Because sometimes with coding assignments, it just takes a long time, and a lot of the time is debugging, where you can just push it in and then it'll output what you need. So I think it's more prevalent, especially in my senior design project where we're on a timeline. So we have a year-long project with a client and we're supposed to deliver a product at the end. And
Mm.
since I'm project manager, I'm setting the deadlines for each team member. You should be done with your block by this date. We need to be done integrating by this date. So by saving time that way, it allows us to make sure we're on track and on progress for our next steps in the timeline. Because in the real world, especially with software engineering, you have things to deliver, you have a product to get out to a client on time. So that time efficiency is important.
And I find, by the way, that real world learning is so nice and so important. I wanted to talk a little bit about this aspect a little bit more, if that's all right with you. I sort of have this thesis that, first of all, in your project, you're the project manager. You probably are both the project manager, and you probably do some of the project as well, I assume, right? But you
Yes.
also
Yep.
take on that role of
Hmm.
making sure that the things run on time from everyone, and they all sort of get to can coexist together harmoniously, right?
Hmm.
Number one is that I I have found, at least for myself, sort of pre AI assistant, and this is like, I mean, I think people think about sometimes like, oh, you're in an education environment, it's different from if you're in the real world environment. It is supposed to be painful, it's supposed to be this, supposed to be that.
Mm.
I don't know, I don't really fully agree with it. You know, at my company we have, like engineers, and they work together and do things. They value learning very much themselves. They will use the tools though in whatever ways that they think is best for them. And best sometimes means more efficient, but sometimes is less efficient, but in order to understand it further.
Hmm.
Just, it's something that you have to understand. And especially sort of in the current climate of AI getting more and more capable in coding and all that. Yeah, I mean, being able to debug faster means that they have less they spending less energy and time to the debugging, which some people might say that that's where the art of
Mm.
coding is. This is, you're supposed to suffer through that, so that you get better. But I will also argue that I observe it in with our engineers, we may not have been able to ship something at all if we didn't get that efficiency. So, and forget the fact that you have, in your case, a client to deliver to. If you didn't get to finish the entire cycle and you slow down the rest of the team and all of the rest of it, you also get less learning done because you were able to get through less of the whole process, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So in some sense, that speeding up of certain aspect of it, it also gave you more opportunity to experience things that you never would get to be able to be able to do. It's almost like if you were training for a marathon, but somehow you can never run past the 20-mile mark. You would never know what the last 6 miles look like,
Hmm. Yes,
right?
for sure.
So
Yeah.
you kind of, like the efficiency gained also means you now get to run the last 6 miles,
Hmm.
and having the entire experience of finishing 26.2 miles is maybe better than having the struggle at mile 15 to 18 so much,
Yes. It
you
is a
know
balance.
it's
Yeah.
a
Because
balance,
some
yeah,
people will
right.
just use chat and then not not have that struggle, and then it's frustrating to
Right,
figure
like,
it
not
out
at
on
all. They
your
just
own.
basically flat out, like, cheated, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, so it's a
yeah,
balance. Like, at
yeah.
some point, you need to balance the efficiency because sometimes we get stuck on a problem and then we use chat, and then at some point you try everything and it's not worth spending time over debugging. You might as well just go to the professor, go to office hours, get it solved in class. So it's a balance of like using efficiency, but to some point it just doesn't work, and you just have to figure it out. And you do end up putting the hard work in. It's just you're skipping over the things that are more easily solvable by using ChatGPT.
I think you're absolutely right, and this is the part that I sometimes, try to look at is you you are if you are someone who actually just have it do everything for you and you just flat out just not spending any time, you're just, basically doing a poor job. What happens is that you get away for a very short time anyway, because you like you said, it's a year-long project. The project gets more and more complex as it goes, and
Mhm.
things are interrelated, and you really have to understand it for it to actually
Yes.
to you to even
Mhm.
contribute.
'Cause
But
it
if you
builds.
are, yeah, if you
Yeah.
are that team member who's just like, I'm just gonna paste in whatever,
Mhm.
after a couple of months, maybe the first couple of months, you are like really like just slacking and not doing anything. But after a couple of months, I don't think you can even contribute at that team because you'd be lost. It would be like outsourcing someone watching a 8 season long series. You've got to watch to know the plot. You can't follow it, if you're
Yes.
not part of it.
Mhm.
And I find that to be sort of like, so I mean, you learn that lesson relatively quickly, I think, if your projects are real world enough. I think it's problematic when the projects are not real world enough,
Mm.
where you are just asking problem sets and individual essays, because then, yeah, it's really easy for someone to just go, yeah, I just did that, I passed it. It has nothing to do with the next project anyway.
Yeah.
So then, like that efficiency suddenly becomes very, so that you can cheat and
Mm.
doesn't there's no concerns,
Mhm.
you
Mm.
weren't really being asked to build on top of it. I
Mhm.
can't imagine in your project that your team members could survive if they just kind of, not actually know what's going on. I find it to be in my team, like if I have an engineers who basically just kind of, they don't really know what's going on, like they can't even last one discussion because we'll be talking about something, be like, well, what do you think of this? And they wouldn't be able, they wouldn't know because they didn't understand,
Mhm.
why the decision was made before, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
it would be like I said, just asking you what happened with last week's episode on Severance, and you're like, well, I didn't watch it. Then you don't know. You just simply
Yes.
don't know, right? You can't
Mhm.
cheat your way out of that.
Uh-huh.
And so, and it's not even so much about cheating. I think like people want to do it at that point. They actually just want to do the project. And I also want have one observation that I have found too, which is because it's efficient, we have started to be able to, at least in our own engineering and design projects, that we've been able to do sometimes sort of additional iterations that
Mm.
previously we wouldn't be able to afford to do because we only had time to do so much, right?
Mhm.
And you kind of have to kind of go, well, this is what we have time for, this is what we're going with. Sometimes even knowing that it may not be the best solution, but we don't have time to experiment with three other solutions. But
Yes.
now I feel like that we are starting to find ourselves that if we make it so that we're just going to almost like let it generate something, it's rough and we're not going to actually use it, but we're going to do three different approaches so that we can experiment a little bit, and then we can like make some decisions.
Mhm. Yeah, that
um
prototyping phase is so
yeah, it's
integral to
like it's
design.
tremendous,
Mhm.
it's tremendous,
Mhm.
like the ability to prototype. And then prototyping is one of those processes that is very well known in that design thinking, in the engineering design sort of process, but maybe it's less so in I don't know, writing an essay on history.
Mm. Mhm.
um, but historians have their own like unique ways of thinking that I think is really useful too. So like I think these are the kind of things that multidisciplinary sort of thinking is really going to enhance the way that we function, especially with this sort of explosion of AI and
Mm-hmm.
so on. So what
Yeah.
do you think as someone who's no, so you talked about it as a student. What do you think, as someone who's about to graduate? Do you feel prepared to go into the workforce? Do you know like this hopefully doesn't scare you. I don't think you should be scared, but I did see that I think Meta had said that that in 2025 they will not hire any junior level developers
Mm-hmm.
because they are finding that they're going to either have AI agents or something to replace that. It definitely creates other problems, which is like if you
Yeah.
can't be junior, how do you become the senior
That's
level
yeah.
developers?
Yeah.
There's a bit of a they're creating a bit of a chicken and the egg, breaking the cycle somewhere in there. Salesforce also said that they will, in 2025, they're freezing, I think, all hiring because they are refocusing and trying to figure out what their engineering needs are. Doesn't mean that they will forever not hire, but they're saying in 2025, we're not hiring at all. We're putting a
Mm-hmm.
freeze on hiring on engineers, which is unheard of for that company before, because every year they always just hire thousands of people. At the same time, there's a lot of needs for engineers everywhere else. But I'm just sort of like painting a picture for people to know, like as in, like beginning of 2025, this is what the climate looks like right now. As someone who's about to graduate and in the job market, networking and so on, how do you feel about this?
Thank you for telling me about it because I didn't know about that until now. So that is a little concerning, especially knowing that the job market is also really competitive in terms of the computer science software space. I've been hearing of people having a hard time getting software positions, internships, and jobs. And I think that that's really discouraging, especially if they're using AI to replace those careers, because when it's, like you said, taking away from new graduates, and it's also taking away that human aspect that I was talking about earlier. Although it is efficient and maybe may save the company some money, you're taking away those opportunities of learning and building your sense of um, community within that company. So that is interesting.
Yeah. But I really, by the way, I I didn't mean to scare you during this conversation here, Clea. But I also think that there is now a groundswell of people like yourself who has the skills, who has the thinking process, who understand projects, who understand how to work, who understand how to ask questions. That's actually one of the skills that is necessary for people to, for example, go with a much more entrepreneurial, path where they're software engineers or engineers who decide that, hey, you know what, I'm making something up here. There wasn't a way for the Filipino community to, beyond Bucknell, but like in maybe in your area, wherever you end up being, and that now you can, because of the speed of development, because of the new tools, because of the access to some of these AI tools, um, that I heard a very interesting interview that said we wonder at what point we're gonna see the first solo entrepreneur billionaire, um,
Mm,
which is a really interesting sort of. And I mean, billionaire is more like a symbol that I don't think I don't even think any of like mere mortals like me can even understand how much money that actually is. But my point, I think the point of it is more like you can potentially be extremely successful at this job, and that you might even be um, able to do it with far fewer resources than what used to be. You don't
mm-hmm.
have to become the Google, that has employs many hundreds of thousands of employees in order to do this really difficult job. It almost feels like there's a lot more opportunities for people to be able to say, you know what, if I think that bringing water to, places in need is the thing that needs to exist in the world, and there is not a business that is doing that right now, I can do it because using the efficiency that's created by AI,
Mm-hmm.
what used to have taken, an insurmountable amount of resource just to do the communication and the design and the PR and all that, I might in 2026 create agents that can take care of a lot of that for me so that I can do things that are more meaningful. I think that's a really different kind of future. I think it's scary on one hand, but it's also like exhilarating on the other hand,
Yeah.
right?
Yes, for sure. That's so interesting because I've spoken to people who when networking, they didn't like major in computer science or anything, but they learned it on their own. And I guess when learning on your own, ChatGPT or AI helpers are such a important and helpful tool to learn as well. So having that aspect to help you do things on your own rather than always relying on having to be taught or having to buy all of these resources in order to get things done is so empowering because you can really do anything on your own these days because of all of the resources, open source platforms available.
Right. But it's also not necessary. It doesn't have to be really solo, right? But imagine if you can run a tremendously impactful business or organization, right, that do meaningful things, but it's just 10 of you.
Uh,
Um,
uh-huh.
right. It could also be this, but it would have in the past would have required 100 people to do.
Yes.
Right. And
Hmm.
it create I like that to me is a really interesting part of the world that I don't think a lot of people are exploring because there's a lot about replacing current jobs and 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 I think that it will create replace some jobs, maybe even many jobs, especially what would be considered entry level jobs or maybe even to a certain degree mid-level jobs. Um, but I think that there it feels like to me kind of like what I was saying before. Okay, you save time over here, but you actually end up spending the time elsewhere. So now you're able to push it further, right?
Yes,
And so
yes.
I feel like that taking something away from one side will inevitably get balanced out on the other side too. Um, but it is difficult, especially for folks who, this was forced on them. This it was a natural progression. If I've had this job for the last 25 years, um, suddenly I'm being forced to reskill, upskill, change skills, change jobs
Mhm.
to deal with this new world. It feels difficult and feels uncomfortable. um but I kind of I was really interested in hearing sort of from someone who's about to graduate, right? I also think about for people who are freshmen now at Bucknell, right? Like when they graduate,
Yes,
what does the world look like then? Because
I
you are
know.
already seeing a little bit of this in 2025, right?
Hmm.
I'd
I'm already
imagine by
seeing.
2028, like that's
Hmm.
gonna be really different, right?
Hmm. And I think the younger generations now they have so much ambition and now they have a lot of resources and more tools. So I see them having more and more progress and more really cool projects coming out that they're really passionate about. I know they're going to achieve so much more. So
Well,
yeah,
you are
that's really
part of the
exciting.
younger generation, Claire. Just wanted to say you have those tools as well, and
Yes.
you get to use them too.
Hmm.
Um, I don't. I hope that by the way that it wasn't you didn't get scared from that, but
I still have hope. Because I feel like what you were saying, it's not enough to be just an engineer. You need to have all of those skills and that interdisciplinary, which I think AI could never replace all of those like human aspects that makes a person because what how you provide value in your work are like you said your past experience and your identity, how all of those aspects of your identity and what you've been through affect how you do your current work, which AI could never have that like history built in.
yeah. And that's right. Actually, AI cannot do that for us. You have to be the one who you can have a lot of experience. Someone can read aloud the experiences to you,
Mm-hmm.
but you still have to go through the hard work is how do you process that and how do you make sense of all
Mm-hmm.
those experiences. I want to say that all that's exactly what your reflections did. Like doing the project itself is one thing, but the reflection is the part where you had the experience. Now you get to process it, and you were able to make pretty big jumps every time. You build one from one to the other, and those are the things that stays forever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the C# code that you wrote in for whatever, that's going to get obsolete, unfortunately, right? But the ability to sort of take the thinking and like combine those experiences and then figuring out what kind of thinker you are, as you solve problems, means that by the time you write the next piece of code that is not even in C#, will you will still be able to apply those, right? And but it's really about even like taking coding to design and all of that is even make it even stronger. I really believe that. I think that's what it's going to be. And you were talking about augmented reality and virtual reality before. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's another really, like, to me, surprisingly unspoken area too. I was thinking
Yes.
about, like if you are training to become a nurse
Mm-hmm.
in 2025 right now, and you're going to graduate in 2028. We talked about that, right?
Mm-hmm.
It may very well be that you are no longer, it may very well be that currently, I think a lot of nursing majors have to learn a humongous amount of content. Like the
Mm-hmm.
material is staggering, right? Like every procedures that they're supposed to know, every
Yes.
condition they're supposed to, all the protocols, right?
Mm-hmm.
I kind of kept imagining with engineers like you, who's going to create a safe, secure, accurate, non-hallucinogenic version of some kind of AR glasses that a nurse would be able to wear comfortably, all
Mm-hmm.
day. And being able to say, like, generally speaking, if I, have a patient who is having a certain kind of symptoms or is having certain kind of pain or knowing that they are having a heart attack, that that your AR will helpfully just go, this is without going through like public servers and stuff, like within the hospital, like it's so it's safe and it's not sharing that material with
Mm-hmm.
anyone. Being able to just go, here here are the next 7
Yeah.
steps. Here
Mm-hmm.
are some other additional things that you need to know. This is the timing in which you need to do them, etc., etc. Not that the nurse should just purely count on that, but having that assistant would be so incredibly useful. And being able
Yes.
to sort of say, like, did I do them, or did I, like, or you maybe a heart attack is common enough that you just know that,
Mm-hmm.
right? But maybe you come across something that you've never done or you haven't done in 3 years,
Mm.
right? Like typically, by the way, like many doctors and nurses in some of those situations, they actually have to look things up, right? They have to, and this is also where sometimes or sometimes some things you missed, and then this is where like malpractice lawsuits come in and so on and so forth. But I could
Mm-hmm.
imagine that, a well-developed tool like that could be life changing for all of us,
Mm-hmm.
right, in medical care.
Yeah, it
And it
saves
would
the
allow for, yeah, it would allow for someone to not count on what if the nurse got tired because they did
mm,
already, it's their 12th hour working that day, and it's been a crazy day, of all kinds of, you know high adrenaline events that happen over and over again, right? It happens, right?
mhm,
And what if you can create that tool, and what does that change for that nursing student?
mhm,
Like what if they end up spending little less energy on acquiring all of the content, which is an for me, when I see it, I feel like it's an insurmountable amount of content
mhm,
that In fact, it just keeps growing because people are researching more, discovering more. How
Yes.
do you even keep that in our brain?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yes. It's impressive the work they do, and there's so much risk in incorporated
Huge
in
amount
their
of they
work.
put their lives
Yeah.
are at stake every single minute because you never
Mm-hmm.
know. Like you can contract whatever it is that's causing someone to be sick, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you're doing all of that, but like I almost imagine like, wow, you would be the person, you'll be the kind of people who would have the skills to create the AR technology that can help someone like that. And in turn, it will help save countless lives, and
Mm-hmm.
it will also change their perspectives a lot too. So I remember, you know, as a kid, I don't know whether you felt that way too. As a kid, I mean, from an Asian family, like there is some default professions that are cool to do, doctors being one, right?
Yes, for sure.
And I remember learning the littlest bit about being a doctor, and it was like, well, it's a lot of studying. It was like a huge amount of memorizing, like lots and lots and lots of facts and big
Mm-hmm.
words and systems. And I remember thinking, that's just not for me. But now I speak with a lot of doctors, people who had gone through medical training, that says, well, yeah, that is actually like legitimately really, really hard. But that's not all I do. In fact, that's not what I do,
Mm-hmm.
right? So they think about the world very differently already. But I have this like, impression that this is an unattainable thing because it's so it's so much about memorizing a huge amount of content, and that I'm just like, that's not for me. Like I may be able to do it, but like, like I don't find that to be a good use of
Mm-hmm.
my time. But
Mm-hmm.
if that got taken out of the equation, maybe not completely, but like the pressure of like
Mm-hmm.
being tested on those things as being the majority of what you do, right? It may mean that providing care for someone, becoming the provide making someone else's healthy, becomes part of the equation, like the bigger part of the equation. It may change a lot of people's minds.
Yes, yeah, I have a similar story of how people are saying. I was asking a friend who graduated, and I was asking her, "Oh, we have to learn so much technical things in our ECAD classes. Like, how much of it do you actually use?" Similar to how the doctors have to learn all of these procedures and memorize a lot of things, but they don't maybe directly use it in their work. So I was asking her, "How much do you actually use this?" Because she's an electrical engineer, and she was saying not too much all of the things that we learned, because I think the processes at school are just teaching you how to learn, teaching you the fundamentals, and what you really do in a real-time job and work is like you learn like the processes that your company uses, and you need to learn how to learn, and that's what school prepares you for. And being able to find those things that you need to learn and learn by yourself, I think that's what AI is really great for, being able to learn fast on the job when you need to know these things, maybe not off the top of your head, but you have like that background.
That's beautifully said. Claire, thank you so much for spending all this time with me. I really, really enjoyed our conversation. You are brilliant. I am so impressed with this, what you have to say and how you think about the world is fascinating. um, I think that those of us, I'd be listening to this again, and those of us I think are also listening right now, who are from my generation, or even the older generations, should look at, you know should listen closely to what you are telling us, in how you think about the world, what makes sense, and how you are, what your real experience is like, so that for those of us who are in any positions of like making those kind of decisions, thinking about like the future of education. Maybe I know that there are people who are deans and department chairs who have the ability to influence where this goes. I think we have a lot of work to do. I think we have a
Mm-hmm.
lot to do to make sure that our like not only for you who graduating in 2025, but what about those who are graduating in 26, 27, 28?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
we gotta do these things quickly
Mm-hmm.
to
Yes.
make sure that you are not gonna be, you know, getting out to the world and feel like that you are sort of, you're not able to contribute, because the real world looks too different from what was presented to you in an education environment.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
I'm so glad that you're at Bucknell, which, like you said, does not do that. It allows you to ask questions, allows you to work on real world project. So you hear from here, Bucknell University, please go check it out. I think many people already know this. I mean, the school is very well known, but for people who are really not, who are thinking about, like, engineering, for example, like Claire should think about what it means to go to a program that has equal emphasis on liberal arts, on sort of the ability for you to ask questions yourselves and to lead teams, and do all these other things that is going to go beyond just 25 really really hard problem sets, right? um, and for those, last reminder, for those who are looking for the next generations of the best talents, I think Clea here is certainly one of them. If you are creating those glasses for AR, for an AR company, contact her quickly, or she would
Yes.
be off the market. All right. Thank you all so much. And Clea, I really appreciate this conversation. I hope that we can get to keep in touch, and let me know how things go. Okay.
Yes, thank you again so much for this opportunity. I really enjoyed reflecting on my e-portfolios and all the projects I've done and how much I've learned since then and how much Digication has helped me to reflect on these experiences and to showcase them as well. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate the kind words. Take care, and good luck with everything, and congratulations in advance on your completion of your degrees.
Thank you so much, Jeff.
Okay, take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
This concludes our conversation. To hear our next episode, be sure to subscribe to Digication Scholars Conversations on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. The Digication Scholars Conversation series is brought to you by Digication, a technology platform powering the most innovative e-portfolio programs in K-12 and higher education. Our website can be found at digication.com. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please like, subscribe, and share with a friend. Thanks for tuning in.